I had 3 sets of car keys in my hands before I had been on the installation for 10 minutes. That is a personal record. I want to be clear that I am not proud of it. The headquarters sat at the top of a long circular drive, a wide stone building with a flag out front and a forecourt where cars pulled up and let people out. It was a Friday. There was a reception that afternoon, the kind the Army throws when a command changes hands, and the officers were arriving in their dress uniforms, and the whole forecourt had the loose, bright energy of people who are early and know it. I was in a gray travel suit. I had flown in that morning. My uniforms were in a garment bag, in a car I had left at the visitor's lot, because I did not want to arrive at my own reception in wrinkled service dress. I wanted 20 minutes to find the restroom, change, and walk in, looking like a person who had not just spent 6 hours on airplanes. That was the plan. Plans are a way of making the universe laugh. I was standing near the bottom of the steps, checking a folder, when the captain reached me. He was young, late 20s. He had the easy confidence of a man who has been told he is going places and has decided to believe it early. He had 2 lieutenants with him, and they were laughing about something, and he looked at me the way you look at a piece of the furniture that is briefly in your way. He tossed me his keys. "Park our cars, miss," he said. "Don't scratch them. The good spots are around back." I caught the keys. That part is reflex. You throw something at me, my hand closes on it. 26 years of physical training will do that to a person. The keys were warm from his pocket. There was a fob and a little plastic tag from a dealership. One of the lieutenants, a tall one, dropped his keys into my other hand before I could say anything. "Better hurry," he said. "He tips if you're quick." The second lieutenant did not laugh. He looked at me for a second longer than the other 2, and something moved behind his face. A small doubt, the beginning of a question. Then the captain said something to him, and he looked away, and the doubt went back to sleep, the way doubts do when the person having them is junior and outnumbered. The third set of keys landed in my hand a moment later. I do not even remember which one of them gave them to me. By then I had 3 sets of keys, and a folder under my arm, and a gray travel suit, and 3 officers were walking up the steps of the headquarters, believing they had solved the small problem of me. I did not move. I have learned to hold very still. Let me tell you who I am, because the story does not work otherwise, and it does not work if I hand it to you all at once either. That is not how truth arrives. Truth arrives slowly, on its own 2 feet, and I have spent a career learning to let it. My name is Eleanor Cade. That afternoon, on the steps, I was 44 years old, and I was a colonel in the United States Army, and I was 90 minutes from taking command of the brigade whose officers were tossing me their keys. I had a silver eagle in a box, in a garment bag, in a car in the visitor's lot. I had enlisted at 18, out of a small town, before any of the men on those steps had learned to drive. I had gone from private to colonel the long way, the whole way, 1 rung at a time, and there is no rung on that ladder I have not stood on. I did not become angry, standing there with 3 sets of keys. People find that hard to believe. They assume there must have been a hot flush of rage, a script running in my head about how sorry these men were going to be. There was not. I have stood in rooms that were genuinely trying to kill me, and a forecourt full of officers who cannot tell a colonel from a valet is not one of those rooms. It is not even close. When a place has actually put your life at risk, the ordinary indignities lose most of their teeth. A tossed set of keys is not a threat. It is a weather report. It tells you the climate you are about to command in. You note it, and you plan accordingly. Rank, I have learned, is not the thing that makes a person hard to insult. Rank is a costume. A good one, useful, but a costume. The thing that actually makes a person hard to insult is having already survived worse rooms than the one they are standing in. I was very hard to insult on those steps. It had cost me a great deal to become that way, and I was not going to spend the whole down payment on a captain with good teeth and a bad afternoon. There was a private nearby, young, 19, maybe 20. She had a name tape that read, Sorrel, and the too careful posture of a soldier still new enough to be frightened of doing the wrong thing. She had watched the whole exchange, and she was mortified on my behalf, which told me something good about her, and she stepped closer. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "do you want me to take those? I can find the captain's driver, or I can figure something out." "No," I said. "Stay a minute, Private. Watch what happens when you don't rush the truth." She blinked. She did not understand. That was fine. She was about to. I have been mistaken for the help on 4 continents. I mean that precisely. Not as a figure of speech. I have been handed coats to hang, orders for drinks, requests to fetch the actual commander. It started before I was an officer, and it did not stop when I became one, and it did not stop when I made major or colonel, and I have stopped expecting it to stop, which is not the same as making peace with it, though from the outside the two can look alike. The first time it happened in a way that mattered was a long time ago, and to tell you the rest of the afternoon on the steps, I have to take you there first because the 2 days are the same day, in the way that certain days in a life turn out to be the same day. It was the year 2011. I was a captain then, 29 years old, in command of a company at a forward headquarters in a country I will not name, in the flat gray building where the staff worked. It was hot. The air conditioning was a rumor. I had been awake for most of 2 days, running my company and standing in for an operations officer who had been sent home sick, and I was standing at a plywood counter reading a report when a colonel walked in. He was visiting from hire. He had the clean uniform and the unhurried walk of a man who slept in a real bed. He looked around the operations center and his eyes passed over me, a tired woman at a counter, and he made a decision about me without knowing he was making it. He held out a paper cup. 2 sugars, sweetheart, he said. And find out where the actual commander is. I don't have all day. I was the actual commander. I took the cup. I want you to understand that I took the cup on purpose, not out of weakness. I got him his 2 sugars. And then I stood him at the map board and briefed him on my company's entire area of operations, every patrol, every source, every road, in the flat, competent voice of a person who knew her ground cold, and I watched the understanding move across his face in real time. The slow horror of a man realizing he had sent the commander for coffee. He apologized. He apologized a great deal, actually. More than the moment required. The way people over-apologize when the shame is really about themselves. I told him it was fine. I have said that so many times the words have gone smooth in my mouth, worn down like a stone in a river. There was a first sergeant in that operations center, Amos Kettering. He was older than the rest of us, gray at the temples, unbothered by almost everything. One of those senior, non-commissioned officers who has seen every kind of day the Army can produce, and is no longer surprised by any of them. He watched the whole thing, the coffee, the brief, the apology. And after the colonel left, Kettering came and stood next to me at the map board, and he gave me the sentence that became my spine. Ma'am, he said, you can spend all day proving who you are. Some officers do. They wear themselves out correcting every fool who gets it wrong. He tapped the map, not looking at me. Or you can let the truth walk in on its own 2 feet. It always does. And it hits a lot harder when you didn't push it. A truth you have to shove down a man's throat. He resents. A truth that walks in on its own and taps him on the shoulder, that one he never forgets. I was 29. I did not fully understand him, but I filed it away, the way you file away the things the wise ones tell you, trusting you will need them later, even if you cannot see how yet. I needed it later. I needed it, as it turned out, on a set of headquarters steps 15 years on, holding 3 sets of another man's keys, with a private named Sorrel, watching me to find out what a person is supposed to do when the world decides they are nobody. I want to stay in 2011 a moment longer, because the coffee cup was not the whole of that year, and the rest of it is the reason a colonel can stand on a set of steps 15 years later and not flinch. 3 weeks after the colonel handed me his coffee cup, the forward base took indirect fire. It came at night the way it usually did, a series of impacts walking across the compound, and the alarm went up, and the whole base did the thing a base does, which is to become, in about 4 seconds, either an organized response or a panic, depending almost entirely on the people in charge. I was one of the people in charge. It was my job to make it the first thing and not the second. I will not give you the whole night. Some of it is not mine to give, and some of it is not the kind of thing this channel is for. What I will tell you is this. There were young soldiers in the open who should not have been in the open. There was a fire in a place where a fire was very dangerous. And there was a stretch of about 20 minutes where the correct decisions and the incorrect decisions were separated by very little, and where a commander who lost her composure would have gotten people killed, and a commander who kept it might not. I kept it. I want to be honest about why, because it is not a flattering reason, or rather it is not the reason people expect. I did not keep my composure because I am brave. I kept it because I had spent my whole career by that point being underestimated, and being underestimated is a strange kind of training. When you have spent years being the person no one expects anything of, you develop a very particular muscle, which is the muscle of staying calm while other people decide what you are. That muscle, built in 100 small rooms where I was handed coats and coffee cups, turned out to be the exact muscle I needed at 2 a.m. with the base taking fire. I was calm because I had been made calm, slowly, over years, by being doubted. The doubt had built the thing that now kept people alive. I have thought about that a great deal. There is a cruelty in it, and there is a gift in it, and I have never been able to fully separate the two. Amos Kettering was beside me for most of that night. He was a first sergeant, and it was not strictly his fight to run, but he ran alongside me anyway, the way the best of them do, being an extra pair of eyes and an extra voice and a steadying hand on the whole thing. At one point, in the worst of it, when a decision had to be made fast and I made it, he looked at me for a half-second in the dark, and he did not say anything, but I saw it. The small recalibration, the moment an old soldier decides that the young captain he has been quietly evaluating is, in fact, the real thing. That look was worth more to me than the award that came later. Awards come from boards. That look came from Amos Kettering, who had seen everything, and it meant he had seen me. They gave me a bronze star with a bronze letter V for valor for that night. I keep it in a box. I do not wear it to feel proud, because most of what I feel about that night is not pride. It is the memory of exactly how close the correct decisions ran to the incorrect ones, and the knowledge that the margin was thinner than anyone who reads the citation will ever understand. But I will tell you what the award did do. It sat, for the rest of my career, as a quiet fact in my file, and every so often, in some room where a man had decided I was nobody, that fact would surface, and I would watch him read it, and I would watch him understand that the woman he had handed his coffee to had done a thing at 2 a.m. that he had only read about. And every single time, the truth walked in on its own 2 feet, exactly the way Kettering said it would, and it hit harder for my not having shoved it. The morning after that night, Kettering found me at the same plywood counter where the colonel had handed me the coffee cup 3 weeks before. He put a fresh cup down next to me. He had made it himself. 2 sugars, the way I take it, which meant he had noticed, at some point, how I took my coffee, which is a small thing and was not a small thing. "You did all right last night, ma'am," he said. That was the whole of the praise. From Amos Kettering, it was an avalanche. "I got lucky, First Sergeant," I said, because I believed it, and because it was partly true. "No," he said. "You got calm. Luck is what we call it when a calm person makes it look easy. I've been doing this 30 years. I know the difference." He picked up his own cup. "You want to know something? That colonel 3 weeks ago, the one who sent you for coffee, he wasn't wrong that you look like nobody. You did. You still do, half the time. You've got a face and a way about you that makes people underestimate you on sight." He smiled, just a little. "It's not a curse, ma'am. That's a weapon. Every one of them is going to keep underestimating you your whole career, and every one of them is going to be standing there flat-footed when the truth walks in because they never saw it coming. You let them keep making that mistake. You let them make it all the way to the top. And you use it?" I have used it. I used it on those headquarters steps 15 years later, though Kettering was gone by then and never got to see it. I let a captain make the oldest mistake in the world, the mistake of deciding a quiet woman in ordinary clothes was nobody, and I held very still and let him make it all the way, and then I let the truth walk in on its own 2 feet, in the shape of a black car with a single silver star on the plate. Amos Kettering built the woman who could do that. He built her out of patience and coffee and one look in the dark. I have tried to build a few people the same way since. It is the best work I know how to do. Back to the steps, back to the present and the 3 sets of keys, and Private Sorrel waiting beside me to see what would happen. What happened was a car. It came up the long circular drive slowly, the way official cars move, in no hurry because the world waits for them. It was black. It was clean in the particular way that only a car with a full-time driver is clean, and on the front plate, where a civilian car would have numbers, there was a single silver star. 1 star, a brigadier general. The car came up the drive, and it did not go around back to the good spots the captain had mentioned. It came straight to the bottom of the steps, to the curb where I was standing, and it stopped. It stopped at my feet. A young officer got out of the front passenger seat. A first lieutenant, by his rank, with the sharp movements and the leather portfolio of an aide-de-camp, a man whose entire job is to know exactly who matters in any room and to make sure they are taken care of. His name, I would learn, was Beck. He came around the front of the car, and he did not look at the captain on the steps, and he did not look at the 2 lieutenants. He walked straight past all 3 of them, straight past the officers in their dress uniforms, and he came directly to the woman in the gray travel suit, holding 3 sets of keys. "Ma'am," he said, "the general saw you from the gate. He asked me to bring you in personally. He's right behind me." I watched Captain Vaughn's face at the top of the steps try 3 different expressions and settle on none of them. Confusion first, then a small sick suspicion, then the beginning of a dawning that he did not yet want to finish. The rear door of the car opened, and Brigadier General Curtis Harmon got out. I knew him a little, by reputation and by one previous meeting. He was 50, lean, gray, with the plain, unshowy manner of a man who has stopped needing to perform his authority because it is simply a fact of him now. He came around the car and up the walk toward me with his hand already extended, and the whole forecourt, which had been a loose, bright crowd a moment before, went very quiet. Officers turn quiet the way a field turns quiet when a hawk's shadow crosses it. They do not always know why. Their bodies know before they do. "Colonel Cade," General Harmon said, and his voice carried, not because he raised it, but because everyone else had gone silent. "Welcome to the division. I wanted to be the first to shake your hand." I shifted the 3 sets of keys into my left hand and shook his with my right. "Thank you, sir," I said. "It's good to see you again." The word colonel moved through that forecourt like a change in air pressure. I have watched it happen before, in other places, and it never stops being a strange thing to witness, the way a single word can rearrange the furniture of 30 minds at the same time. Officers who had walked past me a minute before now straightened without deciding to. The 2 lieutenants near Vaughn took an involuntary half-step apart from him, the way people instinctively make space around someone who has just been struck by lightning, in case there is more coming. And Captain Vaughn understood. I watched it land in him, the whole size of it, all at once. The woman he had tossed his keys to, the woman he had told to mind the paint, that woman was a colonel, and not just any colonel. The color went out of his face from the top down, like water leaving a glass. "Sir," he said, and his voice had gone thin. There's been a mix-up. She had my keys. I thought." "You thought your brigade commander was parking cars, Captain," General Harmon said. He did not say it cruelly. He said it the way you point out that a man is standing in a hole he dug, mildly, factually, which was worse. I felt at that moment the oldest pull I know. It is the pull to make everything smooth again, to smile and wave a hand and say that it was an honest mistake, that no harm was done, that we should all go inside and enjoy the reception and forget about it. That pull has a voice, and the voice is kind, and most of the time, it is a good voice to listen to. The easiest thing I own is the phrase, "It's fine." I have worn it smooth. I could have said it right then and spared everyone the discomfort, and a younger version of me would have. But there were more than 30 junior soldiers and officers in that forecourt, and every one of them was watching to learn what the line meant. Whether a man could toss his keys at a woman he had decided was nobody and simply walk it off with a laugh when it turned out she was somebody. Whether the rule was really a rule, or only a suggestion that applied to people without eagles on their shoulders. That is the thing a crowd is always learning in the 90 seconds after something goes wrong. And fine is not always the same as right. Sometimes fine is just the most comfortable lie in the room. So I did not say it. I made a different choice, and I made it quietly, because quiet is what you reach for when you trust the facts to carry you. And I have always trusted the facts. I turned to Captain Vaughn. I held out the 3 sets of keys, and I gave them back to him one at a time, unhurried, laying each set in his hand like I was returning something he had dropped. "Captain," I said, "your keys, all 3 sets. I'd hate for anyone to think I kept them." He took them. His hands were not quite steady. Behind me, someone in the crowd made a small sound, quickly swallowed. General Harmon looked at Vaughn and then at me, and he lowered his voice, though not so much that the front of the crowd could not catch the shape of it. "Say the word, Colonel," he said. "I can have him standing tall in front of his battalion commander before the reception is over. You should not have to spend your first hour on this." It was a real offer, and a generous one. There is a genuine satisfaction available in that moment, the clean pleasure of handing a proud, foolish young man to a machine that will grind him fine, and telling yourself justice has been served. I know that satisfaction. It is a sugar. You are hungry again an hour later, and the young man is ruined, and the line is no safer for the next person who gets mistaken for nobody. "The word is later, sir," I said. "In private, he is going to be more useful to me than he is embarrassing if we handle this right. Let me handle it." Harmon looked at me for a moment, recalculating, the way senior officers do when a colonel turns out to be a slightly different animal than expected. Then something eased at the corner of his mouth. He's lucky in his commander, Harmon said. He doesn't know it yet. Not yet, I agreed. I turned back to Vaughn. He had come to attention now, too late and too rigid, the way people overcorrect once the ground has moved under them. There was something wet at the corners of his eyes. Not tears quite, the shine of a proud man understanding the exact dimensions of his mistake. I did not enjoy it. Whatever the crowd may have wanted me to feel, I have been young and certain and wrong, and I remember what it costs. Ma'am, he said. Colonel, I didn't know. No, I said. You didn't. And I want to be precise with you, Captain, because this matters. The problem was never that you didn't know I was a colonel. If I had actually been the valet, if I had been a civilian contractor parking cars to feed my kids, everything you did would have been exactly as wrong as it is right now. Do you understand the difference between those two sentences? He swallowed. I think so, ma'am. You tossed your keys at a person you had decided didn't count, I said. The mistake wasn't getting my rank wrong. The mistake was believing there is such a thing as a person who doesn't count, and that it's your job to sort people into that pile. There isn't. Not in my brigade. We are going to talk about it later, you and I, in private, and it is going to be one of the more useful conversations of your career, if you let it be. For right now, go inside, get yourself a glass of water, and when you see me walk into that reception in about an hour wearing a different set of clothes, you stand up straight and you learn something. Yes, ma'am, he said. I caught Private Sorrel's eye then, across the forecourt. She had watched all of it. She had watched a colonel prove, in real time, the sentence I had said to her 2 minutes earlier. Don't rush the truth. Her face had the specific expression I recognized from the inside, because I had worn it once, at about her age, watching an older officer do a quiet, immovable, dignified thing in a room full of people who had underestimated her. It is the look of a young soldier who has just watched the world confirm a thing she badly needed to be true. That the quiet ones are not always the powerless ones. That dignity does not always lose. I gave her a small nod. Just that. Not a summons, not a speech. An acknowledgement, one soldier to another, that I had seen her see it. She straightened without seeming to know she was doing it, and she nodded back. And something passed between us that had nothing at all to do with the difference in our ranks. The forecourt held its breath, still waiting to see whether I would break the captain now that I had every right to. I let them wait. The waiting is the lesson. I have never once been afraid of a silence. I changed in a restroom off the main corridor, out of the gray travel suit and into my service uniform, and I pinned the silver eagle on straight, and I walked into that reception 1 hour later as myself. I want to describe that walk, because it is the part people expect to be triumphant, and it was not. It was quiet. I came through the doors in uniform, and the room registered me, and the conversation dipped the way a room's conversation dips when the new commander enters, and I found the general and thanked him again, and I worked the room the way you work a room. I shook a great many hands. Most of the officers in that reception had not been on the steps and had no idea anything had happened, and to them I was simply the new colonel, and that was exactly as it should be. But some of them had been on the steps. I could tell which ones. They were the ones who shook my hand a little too carefully, who said, "Colonel," a little too clearly, who had adjusted something in themselves in the last hour. And Captain Vaughn was there, standing near a wall with a glass of water, and when I came in, he stood up very straight, exactly as I had told him to, and he did not look away, which took something, and I noted it, privately, in the ledger I keep of who people actually are underneath their worst afternoons. I did not go to him at the reception. That was deliberate. A correction delivered in front of an audience is not a correction. It is a performance, and the lesson it teaches is about power, not about character. I wanted to teach him something about character. So I let him stand against that wall through the whole reception, sweating a little, not knowing when the conversation was coming, learning the specific discomfort of waiting for a consequence you have earned. That waiting was part of it. I have found that the anticipation of a reckoning teaches more than the reckoning itself, if you let it run long enough. The conversation came the next morning. I had him report to my office at 0800 hours. I had been in command for less than 1 full day. He came in and stood at attention in front of my desk, and I let him stand there for a moment while I finished reading a document I was, in fact, actually reading. Then I looked up. "At ease, Captain. Sit down." He sat. He had the careful stillness of a man who believes he is about to be executed and is determined to take it well. I have seen that stillness before. I have worn it. "You've had about 18 hours to think about yesterday," I said. "Tell me what you think this meeting is." "Ma'am," he said, I think this is where you end my career, and I want to say, before you do, that I understand. I earned it. What I did it was beneath the uniform. I don't have an excuse." I let that sit for a second. "That's a better answer than I expected," I said. "It's still wrong. This is not where I end your career, Captain. If I wanted to end your career, I would have let the general do it on the steps yesterday in front of everyone, and it would have been finished by dinner." I stopped him. "Do you know why I stopped him?" "No, ma'am." "Because ending you is easy," I said. "It costs me nothing. It teaches you nothing. And it teaches the 30 soldiers who watched exactly the wrong lesson, which is that this is all about rank, that the only reason you were wrong is that you happened to toss your keys at someone who outranked you. That is not why you were wrong, and I need you to understand the actual reason, because you are going to lead soldiers, and the actual reason is the entire job." I stood up. I came around the desk and I sat on the front edge of it, closer to him, because the important things are said close, not from behind furniture. "You looked at a woman in a gray suit," I said, "and you decided she was nobody. You decided it in about half a second, without a single fact, and then you acted on it. You handed her your keys. Here's the thing I need you to hear, Captain. If I had actually been the valet, it would have been exactly as wrong. If I had been a contractor, if I had been somebody's mother visiting the post, if I had been a private first class in civilian clothes on her day off. Every version of that is the same wrong, and the wrong is not about my rank. The wrong is that you believe there is a category of people who do not count, and that you get to decide who goes in it. There is no such category. The day you decide some human being in front of you is beneath your notice is the exact day you become useless to me, because I cannot trust you with the soldiers who cannot defend themselves. And Captain, most of this job, the actual heart of it, is the soldiers who cannot defend themselves." He was quiet. He was holding my eyes, which I respected. "Can I ask you something, ma'am?" he said. "Go ahead." "Why are you giving me a second chance? You don't know me. I gave you every reason to bury me." I thought about how much to tell him. I decided to tell him a little. "A long time ago," I said, I was a captain, like you, in a bad place, on a bad day, and a colonel walked into my operations center and handed me a coffee cup and told me to go find the actual commander. I was the actual commander. I could have corrected him hard. I had the right to. Instead, an old first sergeant taught me to let the truth stand up on its own, and I did. And the colonel spent the rest of his life, I hope, being a little more careful about who he handed his coffee to. And somewhere in there, people gave me the room to become better than my worst afternoons. More than once. I have had a lot of worst afternoons, Captain. Everyone who has done anything has, and every single time somebody could have ended me and chose to hand me a standard instead. I am handing you a standard. Do not waste it." He was quiet for a long moment. "What's the standard, ma'am?" "You never again decide a person is beneath you," I said. "Not a private, not a contractor, not a spouse at the gate, not a stranger in a gray suit. Everyone gets your full attention and your basic respect until they personally give you a reason otherwise, and even then you correct them like they matter, because they do. That is the standard. It is harder than it sounds. It is a discipline, like physical training, and you will fail at it, and you will get up and do it again, and in 90 days you and I are going to have another conversation, and I am going to have watched you the whole time, and it is going to go a great deal better than this one, or it is going to go worse. That part is up to you." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and there was nothing performed in it. The word was the thing itself. He left. I watched him go, and I made a note in the private ledger that we would see. One conversation does not remake a person, but it can crack them open enough that the remaking becomes possible, and cracking Captain Vaughn open, rather than throwing him away, was the first real command decision I made in that brigade, on my first full morning, before I had signed most of the paperwork that made the command official. Then I sat back down at my desk, and the office was quiet, and I let myself feel the thing I had not let myself feel on the steps or at the reception, which was the tiredness of it. Not the tiredness of one afternoon, the tiredness of 26 years of afternoons. I took off the eagle, and I turned it over in my fingers. It is a small thing, a silver eagle, lighter than you would think. It had taken me a quarter of a century to earn it, from a private out of a small town to a colonel with a brigade, the whole ladder, every rung, and it does not undo a single one of the coffee cups. That is the part nobody tells you. You spend your whole life climbing toward the rank that will finally make them see you, and you get there, and you pin it on, and the very next week, a captain hands you his keys and tells you to mine the paint. The eagle does not stop it. It just means the next room starts a little later before it decides you are nobody. That is the honest truth of it, and I would rather tell you the honest truth than the triumphant lie. I thought about Amos Kettering. He is gone now. He passed a few years ago, in a small house near a lake, an old first sergeant at the end of a long life, and I drove 11 hours to stand at his funeral in my uniform, because he gave me the sentence I have lived on. Let the truth walk in on its own 2 feet. He was right. It does. But he did not tell me, because he was too kind, too, that the price of letting the truth walk in on its own is patience, and that you pay that price your whole life in installments, and that the bill never really stops coming. I have paid it in operation centers and on headquarters steps and in 100 rooms that decided I was the help. I paid a little more of it on those steps yesterday. I will pay more of it tomorrow. And knowing everything I know now, having felt the full weight of that tab, I would still choose it. Every time. Because the alternative, becoming a person who shoves the truth down people's throats to feel large, is a worse way to live than paying the patience bill, and I have watched enough people choose that worse way to know I never want to be one of them. Being received by a general in front of a forecourt full of officers did not give me back the 26 years. It did not unhand a single coffee cup. All it did in the end was remind me in a public place on a bright afternoon of exactly how many of those years there had been, and exactly how heavy the patience had been to carry, and exactly what it had cost me to become a woman who could catch 3 sets of keys and hold very still. The forecourt story got around. These things always do. By the end of my first week, half the brigade had heard some version of it, and the version that traveled was mostly accurate, which surprised me, because the versions that travel usually are not. A colonel showed up in civilian clothes. A captain tossed her his keys and told her to park his car. She held on to them and said nothing, and then a general's car pulled up and stopped for her, and the captain nearly died on the spot, and she did not destroy him. That last part was the part that traveled the furthest, and it was the part I cared about, because it was the part that was actually about command. I made a decision, early, to let the story do its work without my help. I never told it. I never referenced it. I did not need to. A story like that teaches a whole organization something, quietly, without a single memo, and the thing it teaches is, the commander notices how you treat people who cannot do anything for you, and she cares about it more than almost anything else. That is a thing you cannot order into existence. You can only demonstrate it and let it spread. I demonstrated it on a set of steps in a gray suit entirely by accident, and then I got out of the way and let it become part of how the brigade understood itself. Captain Vaughn reported to the motor pool the following Monday. I had thought carefully about where to send him. The instinct is to send a man like that to the most miserable, most punishing job available so that he suffers in proportion to his mistake. I did not do that. Suffering does not teach the lesson he needed, so I sent him to the motor pool, and I gave him a specific task, and the task was this: learn everyone's name. Not the officers, not the senior sergeants, the mechanics, the fuelers, the young privates turning wrenches in the bays who no one important ever bothers to learn. I told him he was to know every one of their names, and where they were from, and one true thing about each of them, and that I would ask him at random over the next 90 days, and that he had better know. It was, I think, the hardest assignment I could have given him, and he understood that it was hard, and he understood that I knew it was hard, and he did it. I would run into him in the bays sometimes, in the weeks that followed, and he would be crouched next to a private, actually listening, learning the name and the town and the true thing, and slowly, over those weeks, I watched something change in him. Not fast. People do not change fast. But the change was real. He stopped walking through the world as though most of the people in it were furniture. He started seeing them. And a man who sees people is a man I can eventually trust with soldiers, which is the only thing I was ever trying to build. At the end of the 90 days, we had our second conversation. He came into my office and stood at attention, and I told him to sit, and I asked him to tell me about a private in the motor pool. He told me about a young man from a hard town who had joined to send money home to a sick mother, who was quietly one of the best diagnostic mechanics in the brigade and had never been told so. Vaughn had told him so. He had also, on his own initiative, put the young man in for a school he did not know he qualified for. I had not asked him to do any of that. He had done it because he had learned to see the person, and once you see the person, you cannot help but start looking out for them. That is how it works. That is the whole secret. It is not complicated. It is just hard. "You've changed my mind about you, Captain," I told him. "You were the worst first impression I have had in a decade. You are turning into one of the better officers in this brigade. Both of those things are true. Carry both of them. The first one will keep you humble. The second one is yours to keep earning." "Yes, ma'am," he said. And then, at the door, he stopped, and he turned around. "Ma'am, the private in the motor pool, the one from the hard town, can I ask, is that why you—" "I was that private, Captain," I said. "A long time ago. From a town like his. That is exactly why. Now go back to work." Private Sorrel, the young soldier who had watched the whole thing on the steps, turned out to be one of mine, assigned to a company in my brigade, and I kept a quiet eye on her. She had frozen on those steps, unsure whether she was allowed to help me, and I understood that freeze, because I had frozen the same way at her age. But something in her had shifted after that afternoon. She had watched a colonel refuse to be diminished by a tossed set of keys, and she had watched the truth walk in on its own 2 feet, exactly the way I had watched an older officer do the same thing at her age, and it had reorganized something in her about what was possible. She made specialist a few months later, and then she was picked up for a leadership course ahead of her peers, and the last time I saw her, she was standing in a formation, carrying herself in a way she had not been able to carry herself on those steps. Straight, certain, present. She caught my eye across the formation, the way she had on the steps, and she gave me a small nod. But it was a different nod than the frightened, mortified one from that first afternoon. It was the nod of a young woman who had decided who she was going to be. I nodded back. That is the whole inheritance, I have come to understand. It does not pass down in medals or in rank or in stories that travel around a brigade. It passes one nod at a time from a person who held their composure to a younger person watching to see if it can be done. An older officer, whose name I will not even tell you, did it for me once, in a room full of men who had underestimated her, and she never knew what she did, and I built an entire career on the back of a thing she was not aware she had taught me. And on a set of headquarters steps, in a gray travel suit, holding a stranger's keys, I did the same thing for a frightened private named Sorrel, without meaning to, and she will do it for someone else someday, and that someone will do it for someone after that. That is the only kind of immortality I have ever believed in. It is quiet, and it is invisible, and it is the realest thing I know. I took command of that brigade on time, in my own way, wearing my own uniform, an hour after a captain handed me his keys. I have commanded it well, I think, or at least honestly, which on the good days is close enough to the same thing. And I have never once, in all the months since, mentioned the afternoon on the steps to anyone. I did not need to. The story did its work, the captain did his, the private did hers, and the brigade quietly became a place where you do not toss your keys at people you have decided are nobody, because somewhere near the top, there is a colonel who was that nobody once, the whole way up, and who never forgot a single second of it. I met the motor pool private myself, eventually, the one from the hard town, the one Vaughn had learned to see. His name was not important to the story the brigade told, and I will keep it his, but I want to tell you about the afternoon I found him in the bays, because it is the whole point of everything else, and without it, the rest is just a satisfying anecdote about a captain getting his comeuppance. And I didn't tell you all of this for an anecdote. I had gone down to the motor pool for my own reasons, to walk the bays, to be seen, to put my hands on the actual work of the brigade instead of the paperwork about the work. And I found him under a vehicle, only his boots showing, and I crouched down, and I talked to him for a while about the vehicle, and then about him. He was 19. He had joined to send money home to a mother who was sick, the way I had joined to get out of a town that was closing in on me, and he was, as Vaughn had said, quietly one of the best diagnostic mechanics in the brigade, and no one had ever told him so before Vaughn did. He told me that, not as a complaint, just as a fact. No one had ever told him he was good at anything. He said it the way you say a thing you have made your peace with. I looked at that young man, covered in grease, 19 years old, better at his job than people twice his age, invisible to almost everyone above him, and I saw myself so completely that it took the breath out of me for a second. Because I had been him, exactly him, a young enlisted soldier from a hard town, good at the work, sending money home, sorted on site into the pile of people who do not count. The only difference between that private, under the vehicle, and the colonel crouching next to him was time and luck, and a handful of people along the way who had decided to see me when they did not have to. So I saw him. I told him he was good at his job, in specific terms, because specific is the only kind of praise that lands. I asked him what he wanted, really wanted, and he told me haltingly that he had thought about becoming a warrant officer, a technical expert, but that it had seemed like the kind of thing that happened to other people. I told him it was going to happen to him, and that I would make sure the door was open, and that walking through it was his job, but that no one was going to be allowed to tell him the door was closed. And I watched something happen in his face that I have seen happen in a handful of faces over the years, and that is the entire reason I stayed in the army long past the point where I could have left. It was the look of a person discovering that the ceiling they had assumed was over them was not actually there, that it had never been there, that someone with the authority to say so had just told them they were allowed to rise. That look is the only thing I have ever cared about. Not the eagle, not the brigade, not the general's car stopping at the curb. That look on the face of a 19-year-old who had been told his whole life, in 1,000 small ways, that he was nobody. In the moment he begins to suspect it might not be true, I have spent 26 years chasing that look. I caught it under a vehicle in a motor pool from a private whose name the brigade will never know, and it was worth more than every reveal, every reckoning, every satisfying moment on every set of steps I have ever stood on. Because here's the thing I understand now that I did not understand as a young captain that Amos Kettering understood and tried to tell me. The reveal is not the point. The moment the car pulls up and the room turns and the captain goes white, that moment feels like the point, and it is not. It is a firework. It is bright, and it is loud, and it is over in a second, and it changes nothing by itself. The point is the private under the vehicle. The point is what you do with the standing you fought for once you have it. You can spend it on fireworks, on the satisfaction of watching the people who doubted you understand their mistake. And some people spend their whole authority that way, and they end up with nothing but a collection of moments when they were briefly proven right. Or you can spend it the other way. You can use it to go find the people no one sees, and see them, and tell them the ceiling was never there. That is what the standing is for. That is the only thing it is for. Everything else is a firework. There is one more person from that afternoon I have not told you about, and I want to, because he taught me something too, and the lesson ran the other direction. There were 2 lieutenants with Captain Vaughn on the steps. One of them, the tall one, laughed and told me the captain tipped if I was quick. But the other one did not laugh. He was the one who looked at me a second longer than the others, the one in whom I saw a small doubt flicker and then go back to sleep. His name was Bryce Holland. And in the weeks after, I found myself thinking about him more than about Vaughn, because Vaughn had done the loud, obvious wrong thing, but Holland had done the quiet, common one. He had seen that something was off. He had felt the doubt, and he had let it go because he was junior and outnumbered, and it was easier to look away than to be the one who said, "Wait, are we sure about this?" I did not send for Holland, but I made a point, over those weeks, of being where he was, of watching how he worked. And I saw a decent officer with one bad habit, which was the habit of going along, of feeling the wrongness of a thing and staying quiet because speaking up was uncomfortable. It is the most common failing in the whole army, more common by far than cruelty. And it does more damage, because cruelty is rare, and going along is everywhere. I found a reason to have him in my office about a month in, ostensibly about a training schedule, and at the end of it, I said one thing to him. I said, "Lieutenant, on the steps that first day, you knew something was wrong. I watched you know it." He went still. I said, "You didn't do anything wrong. You didn't toss me your keys. But you felt the doubt, and you swallowed it, because the captain was senior, and you were junior, and it was easier. I want you to remember that feeling, that little pull that said, 'Wait, this isn't right.' That pull is the most valuable thing you own as a leader, and the whole system is going to spend your career trying to teach you to ignore it. Don't. The day you learn to override that pull is the day you become useless to me, no matter how competent you are. Your competence is not the thing I need most from you. The thing I need most from you is that you never learn to look away." He looked at me for a long moment. "How did you know I felt it, ma'am?" "Because I have felt it," I said. "Standing in rooms where something was wrong, and I was too junior to be sure I was allowed to say so. Everyone with a conscience feels it. The leaders are the ones who keep feeling it and act on it anyway. The rest learn to make it stop. Don't make it stop, Lieutenant. It is the best part of you." He carried that. I watched him carry it. A few months later, he was the one, in a planning meeting, who said the uncomfortable thing that everyone else was thinking and no one wanted to say, and it changed the plan for the better, and probably kept some soldiers safer. And he looked at me across the table when he said it, just for a second, and I gave him the smallest nod. And he understood. The pull. He had not looked away. That is the entire job. It sounds so simple when you say it out loud. It is the hardest thing there is. I have thought a great deal since that afternoon about how many people it took to make it what it was. It took a captain willing to be foolish in public. It took a general observant enough to stop his car. It took an aide who knew to walk past the officers and come to me. It took a private brave enough to offer to help a stranger. It took a lieutenant honest enough to feel a doubt, even if he swallowed it. And it took a first sergeant, 15 years dead, who taught a tired captain at a plywood counter to let the truth walk in on its own 2 feet. None of them knew they were part of a single afternoon. None of them knew they were teaching anyone anything. That is how it almost always works. The lessons that shape us are handed to us by people who have no idea they are handing us anything, on days they will not even remember, and we carry them for the rest of our lives and pass them on the same way, blind, to people we will never think about again. I command that brigade still. It is good work. It is the best work I have ever had, better even than the eagle, because the eagle is a thing you wear and the work is a thing you do. Every morning I walk into a headquarters full of soldiers, most of whom will never know the story of the steps. And I try to run a place where no one gets handed their keys and called nobody, and where the ones who feel the doubt learn to speak it, and where the person with the least power in the room is treated as though they have the most. I fail at it some days. Everyone fails at it some days. And I get up the next morning and do it again, because it is the only kind of command I believe in, and because a first sergeant with 2 sugars in his coffee once decided a tired captain was worth building, and I have spent the rest of my life trying to be worth the effort he spent. I want to talk to you now, whoever you are, wherever you are listening to this. I did not tell you this story so that you would enjoy watching a captain turn white on a set of steps, though I understand the wish to enjoy it, and I do not begrudge you it, and I did not tell it so you would cheer when the general's car stopped at the curb, though the cheer is human, and I felt a version of it myself. I told it to you because somewhere out there, and maybe today, and maybe an hour ago, someone looked at you and decided you were nobody. They looked at your quiet, at your ordinary clothes, at your patience, at the fact that you were not making noise about who you are, and they sorted you into the pile of people who do not count, and they handed you their keys, literally or otherwise, and told you to make yourself useful. And it stung. And you are still carrying the sting. I know. I have carried 1,000 of them. I caught 3 of them on a set of steps in the time it takes to tie a boot. Here is what I have learned, and I have made a long study of it, so I am telling you something I am sure of. When someone decides you are nobody, you do not owe them a demonstration. You do not owe them the reveal. You do not owe them the moment where the car pulls up and the room turns, and they finally understand. Sometimes those moments come. When they come, they are not nothing, but they are not the point, and they are not yours to summon on demand, and a life spent waiting for the car to pull up is a life spent letting other people decide when you are allowed to be real. You were real the entire time. You were real in the gray suit. You were real before the eagle, before the reveal, before anyone important looked twice. You would have been exactly as real if the car had never come at all. What you owe, in the moment someone hands you their keys and calls you nobody, is not proof. It is your own composure. It is the refusal to become smaller than you are, and the refusal to become louder than you are, and the simple, immovable fact of yourself, held intact and carried through the moment with your head level and your hands still. That is the whole of it. That is the only victory that belongs to you and cannot be taken back. The truth of who you are is patient. It has always been patient. It does not need you to shove it in anyone's face. It will walk in on its own 2 feet in its own time, and sometimes you will be there to see it land, and sometimes you will not. And either way, your only real job is to still be standing there, undiminished, when it arrives. So if someone has handed you their keys and told you to mind the paint, hear me. Hold still. Keep your composure. Keep your name. Do not spend yourself proving to small people that you are large. Let the truth walk in on its own 2 feet and stand there beside it when it does. And in the meantime, learn the names of the people no one bothers to learn, and treat the person with the least power in the room as though they have the most. That is not weakness, I promise you, from the far end of a career built entirely out of rooms that decided I was nobody, that it is the strongest thing there is, the end.